Thank you, everyone, for being on today's webinar, Revolutionizing Early Childhood Teaching, the third of 4 webinars for the Early Learning Fellows. We know that some of you are only on the call via the audio portion, and we're glad that you're able to make it. You know, I'm really glad to be here today. I was on maternity leave, and so I'm really excited that this is the webinar that I'm going to be moderating. We've got some great panelists, and we're just really excited about getting this information to you. I'd like to remind you that the fellows, the webinar topics are part of your feedback and your thoughts. And so we have another seminar coming up in 2 months, and we are still thinking about the final topic for that seminar. So we would love to hear your thoughts. I would encourage you to email ideas or suggestions to me or to Allison May. We're eager to continue providing a forum to learn and exchange ideas and to hear from other states. So as I mentioned, in 2 months there's going to be another webinar on Friday, August 10th. This will be the 4th and final webinar of our series. You know, just a reminder, the webinar will be free to fellows to join, but registration is mandatory. So anticipate a link to the registration page in a few weeks, and we'll get that webinar set up for us to be ready in August. So like I said, we're still hammering out some details, but we really would love your feedback. So if there's anything specific you'd still like to discuss in depth, please email me or Allison. So, we, again, would just love to hear from you. So in a few moments, I'll mention the goals of today's webinar, and we'll try to make the webinar as interactive as possible. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions either through your computer or by the phone, and the webinar operator will explain how to do that now. So Rachel, can you come back on and let us know how to do that?
Sure. If you would like to submit a question during the webinar, you will type it in the chat box that you see and hit submit. When they are ready to make questions, you will have an opportunity to hit *1 on your telephone keypad at that time. Your name will be announced and your line made live when your question is up. If at any time your question has been answered, you can remove yourself from the queue by pressing 1. If you're using a speakerphone, we ask that while posing your question, you pick up your handset to provide favorable sound quality.
Thank you. So one last thing I'm going to mention before we start in with our panelists. I just want to mention to the fellows that we have some NCSL resources for you available at any time at your fingertips. So we have our NCSL legislative database where you can go in and look for early childhood legislation pending, enacted. It's a really good resource, and it helps, I think, get a sense of the trends and what's going on in other states. We also provide research information requests to you, the fellows, so feel free to email us. Let us know if you have any questions, if it pertains to what you see today in today's information or any other early childhood questions. We'd be more than happy to help you out. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce the speakers and go through the agenda. Let's see. Thank you. So I already went through the welcome and the logistics, but here's the agenda. We're going to have Adele Robinson speak first, then Bob Pianta, and then we'll have some discussion and questions, and then we'll wrap up. So I'm going to introduce our 2 panelists, and then we'll start with Adele to present. So Adele Robinson is with the National Association for the Education of Young Children, and you see her bio now on the screen. But for you guys on the phone, she's the Deputy Executive Director of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, NAEYC, and she's also the Director of Policy and Public Affairs. This afternoon, she's going to discuss policy trends and highlights in professional development for early childhood educators. And then our next presenter is Bob Pianta. He is the Dean of the Curry School of Education at the University of Virginia. He's also the director of UNV's Center for Advanced Study of Teaching and Learning. Today, Bob will talk about his research on what it takes to be a good teacher and the interaction between young learners and their teachers. He's going to provide the information that they do to provide strategies for teachers and assessment tools for quality of teaching. Just a reminder for the folks on the phone, you were sent out an email with the PowerPoints. So you should have those at your fingertips. If you don't, email Allison and she will get those to you. So I'm going to hand this over to Adele. So Adele, if you want to take control and start. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Julian. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with your fellows. This is an exciting area, and it's really glad to see so many of you able to participate. Actually, I went one too many. I wanted to start by just really laying the groundwork as we talk about teacher training in early childhood, because we have a wide range of diversity of teachers, and yet certain things are in common, and those are the things that we need to repair. We are a primarily female workforce in child care, and you'll see as I go through why that may be the case. For the most part, the education ranges are fairly low. They, in some states, do not even require a high school degree to be a lead teacher in a child care center. And in other settings and other funding streams that may also be delivered in child care, there may be a bachelor degree requirement or even higher. So there's a wide range, although most of the teachers are at the lower end of that scale. Many are, because of the low qualifications and the way in which we finance early childhood, many of them themselves are low-income people. They are eligible for child care subsidies for their own children. We see from census data and Bureau of Labor Statistics data that the average child care teacher makes between $19,000 and $20,000 a year, preschool and pre-K in community-based settings, and Head Start around the middle of the 20s. And that can be with a BA degree or a GED. This is quite different than their counterparts in kindergarten, who could be making anywhere from $40,000 to $50,000 as a kindergarten teacher with the same credentials. Our turnover, as you would expect, is extremely high, which is not only what makes fragile business models for early childhood programs in the community, but is problematic for children who really do need consistency of their teacher and caregiver. Professional development is also varied. States, you know that you set the requirements under the Child Care Block Grant and licensing, and those are usually the requirements that include how many pre-service hours, if any, because many states don't require any, and how many hours during the year. In pre-K, which you also control, many of you have requirements for professional development as well as an entry requirement of either an associate or bachelor degrees. Some of the states require a teacher license depending on where the pre-K is delivered. Professional development, however, unlike K-12, tends to rest with the responsibility of the individual. It's usually paid by the individual. The individual may or may not receive some sort of remuneration from the program. It's not like school districts, which simply pay it, and the teacher doesn't have to do it out of pocket for the required professional development. One of the problems we have with professional development is because child care teachers are working, and pre-K teachers in child care are working at least an 8-hour day, and many of them are going back to school and taking professional development while they work. It's important to remember that as we give individuals the time and opportunity for professional development, that we need to keep substitutes and others in the classroom so that we can keep to the good ratios that children need. One of the problems we have with our professional development is much of it does not actually count. So there are a lot of trainings that this low-income workforce is taking over and over again, sometimes repeating the same training, or it could even be new training, and yet it doesn't articulate to either a credential or a degree, but it is something set in state requirements. When they do attain a degree, there isn't necessarily better compensation. The financing of early childhood is primarily on parents, and there's a tipping point for how much they can pay regardless of the degree of the staff. So we'll start with some federal policy impacts that I'm sure you're aware of. As you know, the Child Care and Development Block Grant, known as the Child Care Development Fund in your state, is a large amount of money that comes into your state for child care, not only access but quality. The plan has recently changed from the Department of Health and Human Services on what states have to report, and there is going to be a lot more attention to reporting what your state is doing, what is happening with the workforce in early childhood. The Head Start Act of 2007 required 50% of Head Start teachers nationally, not by state or program, but nationally, to have a BA degree by 2013, and I hear we're going to probably exceed that requirement. Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grants, which 36 states and the District of Columbia applied, and 9 have so far been awarded. don't have any particular requirements for teachers or professional development, but they do require a lot more attention to thinking through workforce quality through some form of a quality rating and improvement system and your higher ed system. And lastly, I think this is not well known, the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008 includes new provisions that give parity to child care and state pre-K and Head Start teachers with K-12 teachers for loan forgiveness if they work in a low-income program. Hasn't been appropriated yet, but at least on the books there is some parity with the K-12 teacher. So where are you? Well, most of your states are relying on your federal child care development block grant funds for the professional development, even for scholarships, for people in child care, and often that can be people who are working both child care and pre-K, to get their professional development. Many of you are focusing on professional development linked to your quality rating and improvement system and differentiated levels of training with more mentoring and coaching, oftentimes to the staff in programs that participate in the QRIS. What's coming out of this as well is that we're creating another role in the field, which is the technical assistance professional, the coach or the mentor or the consultant, and we need to think about them as we think about professional development for people in the field, as they are the people closest to the teachers on this issue. So while we see many of the components in states of a system, they're not really linked together yet so that we have an integration and cross-sector approach to how we provide professional development. So that's one of the reasons we at NAEYC are talking and working with states on a system of professional development that would be accessible and deal with people regardless of what setting they're working in. So whether it's child care, schools, state-funded pre-K, early Head Start, early intervention, that we have a system that is consistent and coherent, because after all, the 3-year-old child doesn't care which setting they're in. They care about the quality of the adult working with them and with their family. As I said before, we have providers who are taking a lot of professional development hours, but it isn't necessarily moving them into a professional pathway, and we need to deal with that. We need to deal with the compensation issue, which would be part of a systemic approach to professional development and degrees. And lastly, it's important to have a system that's different than K-12 because there is specialized knowledge. We talk about our system as birth to 8 for today. I'm really going to focus just on the birth to 5. But there is specialized knowledge for early childhood education, and it's important that we have standards and competencies that reflect the specialized knowledge. So one of the things that we've been working on, and we want to thank the Birth to 5 Policy Alliance and the McCormick Foundation for 6 years now of funding on this work. We started with a workforce policy blueprint, and we went around the country talking to experts and providers about workforce policies, professional development. And we came forward with a policy blueprint for states, a guide to states, an environmental scan, and a variety of tools for them to think about an integrated system that would be cross-sector. Wouldn't matter whether someone ended up teaching in Head Start or teaching in child care or teaching in state-funded pre-K, and that is both those working in direct relationship with children in the classroom and the program and non-direct roles such as resource and referral or licensing or the new growth in technical assistance providers. We came down to 6 essential policy areas for states to think about. One is professional standards. That would lead to career pathways. Of course, to have a career pathway that actually moves you forward, we need to talk about articulation not only between 2- and 4-year higher ed institutions, but between community-based training and other credentials leading toward a degree. We need to think about our advisory structures, who is in charge of early childhood professional development and its intersection with other systems and councils, commissions, and agencies. A lot of attention now to data. We have very little data about large parts of the early childhood profession. And then lastly, financing. We have to think about financing the system of professional development and financing the opportunities for individuals to grow. And across all of those principles, we look at each essential policy area by these principles, which is integration. How well are we looking across the sectors? so that we are getting better consistency and less duplication and perhaps even some savings of money and time. Quality assurance, obviously. We have a lot of people out there who hang a shingle and call themselves a professional development provider. How do we ensure that what people are receiving is good professional development? Access, diversity, and inclusion. Are we being diverse and inclusive not only in who we are providing professional development to, but who we're listening to and who is helping to create professional development? And then lastly, the compensation parity issue. So one example of this that we work with states on a lot, you may or may not be familiar with the fact that NAEYC has had national standards for professional preparation for 30 years, revised 2 years ago. They are revised fairly regularly. And they are best known really for teacher preparation program accreditation, either through NCRECE for those programs that are early childhood teacher programs, birth through age 8, or ACADA, which is an NAEYC system of accreditation of associate degrees, which hadn't been available before. And then what we do is we look to work with states on how to align your state standards with these national standards. And the hope is that we will get not only more consistency with those standards that can also lead to recognition, but also perhaps some more portability and reciprocity across states because states will be using similar standards. So one of the reasons that we care so much about standards is not only for teacher program accreditation and recognition in higher ed institutes, but to make it easier for articulation agreements between institutions and then looking forward to some of the things like CDA and other providers to the extent. As we talked about at the beginning of this session, so much of what a teacher takes now as professional development doesn't actually count. And if we have standards that go, and in fact our standards are the same for associate, BA, and higher, the competencies change, but the standards are the same, it will be easier to create these articulation agreements. And we have states where this is being done. I would advise you to look at Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and New Mexico. Not only will this help the institutions and will help the individual who has been paying for a lot of training that hasn't counted, and it will begin to create a clearer pathway. One of the issues that all of this is raising is the issue of advising individuals. Many of our teachers, we started out with how low income they are going to be the first person in their family to attend post-secondary education. And so advising people on a pathway, being clear you're advising them on a pathway that has articulation availability will be important as part of your policies. So I've talked a bit about technical assistance professionals, and we are coming out with a paper at the end of this month that will give some guide to states on policies about integrating them into your professional development system. Many of these are on-site coaches and mentors. We've seen a huge rise of them in QRIS. Head Start has some home visiting, early intervention, and others. And they are the on-the-ground people working with the teachers and the directors. We really care about these people being in the same professional development system with the same standards, but they would have specialized competencies, credentials, assurances around quality, and different career pathways. What we heard from so many people is they sort of organically move from the role of director to a technical assistance or professional development provider, but we have to really be sure, going back to those principles and the essential policy areas, that we've been clear that in their new role, they really can provide the quality professional development that the field needs. So some thoughts in your role as state legislatures. One of the things is to think about how you will find the funding for individuals to meet higher standards. We're seeing a lot of talk about raising the bar, and we need the resources. This is not a community of people who are well enough paid to afford all the new requirements that you should be doing and all the professional development they should be receiving without some sort of financial support to them and their program. Recognize that at the end of the day, it's not just receiving the professional development, but it's remaining in the field and in the programs, and what are the policies and resources that will compensate them and help programs retain them now that they have more knowledge and skills. The other thing we would ask you to do is by going through the blueprint and the tools we've had there, and Iowa would be a good place to talk to people. They've used this blueprint there as well as in California, is how are you knitting your policies together? So when you do your scan of the policies, how well are they available across the sectors, child care, Head Start, state pre-K school? How inclusive is your process? Who's been at the table? Who is being supported? What are the gaps that you're finding? What are the links that you are finding? And lastly, I just wanted you to have some resources. Know that we are open to helping you at any time. Reach out to Billy Young on my staff, who has several decades of assistance with states and localities, with technical assistance on systems work and professional development specifically. And you can email her or call her at NAEYC at any time. We're happy to work directly with you and with NCSL on your concerns and how to move forward. And with that, I want to turn it over to Bob.
Thanks, Adele.
Rachel, will you go ahead and give Bob controls, please?
One moment.
And while they're doing that, this is Julie. I just want to mention to the fellows that all the resources that Adele mentioned will be on the fellows' website, so you'll have direct access to it. And the paper that she mentioned that will be available at the end of the month, we'll make sure that we get that out to the fellows as well.
Great. So I thought Adele gave a terrific overview of the policy issues around early childhood teachers and teacher preparation, the development of the workforce. So I'm not going to reiterate, the importance of the demand for effective teaching and teacher training and the scale of that problem. I think one of the important points here is that we're talking about many thousands of individuals that need support. What I'll spend my time focusing on is the work that we've been doing over some time around the measurement of teacher-child interactions that take place in child care and early education settings, and a study that we've conducted under the auspices of the National Center for Research in Early Childhood Education that tests an approach to teacher professional development we call My Teaching Partner that has some promise. I think one of the things that's really important to remember, and I think places my presentation in the context of Adele's prior discussion, is that we have a lot of evidence now that that really suggests that teacher professional development in early education, for the most part, is not really producing the kind of outcomes for teachers and kids that we want, but there are a lot of potential promising approaches coming down the line. I think the materials I'll talk about are an example of that. Okay, I got to get my... Okay, so we focus on teacher-child interactions. I hope to present a little bit of information to convince you that these both can be measured and can matter for their learning and development. We break this larger frame of interactions into three kind of buckets: the kind of emotional supports that teachers provide to children through their behavior, how they organize the classroom, and their instructional supports for student learning. Whoops, I just hit the wrong button. Okay, great. Sorry about that. We measure these interactions, these three broad buckets running down the right side, using a procedure we call the Classroom Assessment Scoring System, or the CLASS. And each one of those broader areas or domains of interaction are measured through focusing on certain features of interactions that kind of fit within those. So in emotional support, you see running down the left side, features of interactions that we pay attention to when we're in a classroom watching a teacher behave with children. And the way this procedure works is the observer will spend about 20 minutes watching and taking notes. These are observers that are trained up to a very high level of agreement with gold standard video-based coding. They have to pass a test to be able to do this observation, and they assign a rating of 1 to 7, sort of 1 being low and 7 being high, on those different features running down the left side of the slide here. So things like how sensitive the teacher is in engaging the children in organization, how productive is the time that they spend, how's the teacher handling behavior management, and then in instructional support, we really focus on problem solving, the kind of feedback that children get, and the richness of language. if we went into many thousand early education classrooms, these are classrooms that span children from 3 to 3rd grade. This comes from several studies that we've pulled together over the course of several years. So this is roughly 7,000 classrooms across the country. We see that, if we were to just graph the frequencies of what we see in classrooms, we find that for the most part, classrooms are of moderate quality in terms of the kind of emotional supports that teachers display to kids, and modestly well organized. But what's notable about this is that the kind of interactions between teachers and children that are language rich, that are focusing on ideas and concepts and not just rote memorization, and that provide children feedback for their learning is very, very low. So there's an average score of roughly about a 2 in terms of that 1 to 7 rating for the features of instructional support. Now, one of the things that's important to demonstrate in any sort of measurement tool is that what it is that you're actually measuring matters for children's learning. And so I just presented to you a descriptive picture of what classrooms look like across the country. And what I'm presenting now in this slide are the associations between those features of interaction that we observe teachers displaying in pre-K programs and the learning gains of children. So if you run down the left side of that graph, you'll see the various features of school readiness that we assessed pre and post in children attending a wide range of programs for 4-year-olds across the country. And then running across each column are features of the environment that are either observed or measured. So the emotional support and instructional support from the class, the early childhood environment rating scale total score, and structural features, which tend to be things like the number of children in the classroom, but also things like whether the teacher has a master's degree or a bachelor's degree, their years of experience, the kinds of features that we often kind of capture in policy. And here it's very clear that it's the action, in a sense, is in the interaction, that the ingredients of classroom experience that are driving growth in children's performance, school readiness-wise, over the course of the year are those features of interaction that we've been assessing. What's interesting in this particular slide is you see how important those features of instructional support are, so that even though those features are not present in an awful lot of classrooms at a very high level, the variation in instructional support really does matter. And in fact, we followed those children from that study, from the slide I just showed, into kindergarten to see whether those features of interactions we assessed in pre-K year still mattered for their performance at the end of the kindergarten year. And in fact, children who were in pre-K classrooms offering higher levels of instructional support continued to display better language skills at the end of kindergarten year, despite the kind of experiences that they might have been having in kindergarten. And in fact, obviously the kind of experiences in kindergarten did matter, but they added on top of the prior experiences in pre-K. So what we see here is some evidence that what happens in pre-K between teachers and children really does matter. Instructional support being particularly important matters not only in pre-K, but matters for the children's learning that will take place the next year. And that learning that takes place the next year is also contributed to by the quality of a classroom that they are in that next year. One of the things that's been interesting to us is to try to understand whether there are what we call threshold effects. So I showed you that colored frequency distribution a couple minutes ago. And what we've learned is that there are points along those distributions that seem to matter more or less for children's development. So, for example, classrooms that would show an average rating of a 4.5 or so or above, it's those classrooms that are above that level that really are the places in which kids are making more gains. And for instructional support, we see really a 2 in that 2 to 3 range of a rating on a 1 to 7 using our assessment is really the place where children's learning really starts to take off. An important part of this is that just moving, particularly for instructional support, that graph, again, that graph where the bump was the blue bump on the left side, moving those classrooms about 1 point, so from a 2 to a 3, can make a really big difference. It's where we find that shift from 2 to 3 is the shift when the classroom starts becoming more cognitively focused for kids, and that seems to be quite meaningful for kids learning. We also find in a couple different studies the diversity of language, spoken language, home spoken language in early childhood is just stunning. And clearly a big question for us was whether the observational tool that we developed or that the interactions that we're assessing in a sense matter and behave in a similar way for children from different language backgrounds. So we did a study with children who were coming from Spanish-speaking homes, dual language learners, and found good evidence to support the use of the instrument in diverse settings. So in some sense, the kind of interactions, the qualities of interactions that we're looking at in dominant language settings are similarly important for children who are in dual language learner settings. It's an important finding for the scope with which these tools can be applied. And this graph just shows that this pattern of the importance of teacher-student interaction continues into first grade. So here we're looking at gains in children on a literacy test in first grade from fall to spring, and we have rated the first grade classroom as low, moderate, or high on instructional support. And we're looking at kids in the orange bar. That's the learning gains that they make. Those are kids coming from families in which the mother has a college education or more. You see that basically they make similar gains regardless of the level of instructional support. These are kids getting a lot of enrichment at home, typically. And then the kids are coming from low education backgrounds, so high school education or less, are highly dependent upon the quality of instructional support. So they make the same gains as the kids coming from high education families if they're in classrooms with high instructional support, but if they're not, and particularly if they're in low instructional support, the learning gap is just increasing rather than decreasing. Okay, so I've tried to make the case that we can measure interactions, and we can, and what we measure actually relates to children's learning in the early years. And so the question then becomes, can we improve the qualities of interactions, particularly instructional support, and can we nudge those interactions in a positive direction at a quantity that can really make a difference for kids? We do this by basing our professional development off of our definitions of interactions on the class. So we take the class as the anchor or target for interactions, and then we develop tools that hopefully produce those. And we have 3 tools: a video library, which gives people the opportunity to observe and analyze others' interactions; a coaching model where teachers get analysis and feedback on their own interactions; and a college course that is teaching a set of knowledge and analytic skills that we have all tested these in experiments and proven that they work. So I just want to show some examples of that. This is an example of the video library. So you might say, what do you mean by teacher sensitivity? What do you mean by feedback? You could get on this library and see clips such as this, which are a brief clip that demonstrates what the teacher is doing in this clip that is highly sensitive, and the annotation to the right side provides very specific detailed descriptions of that. So this way teachers can build up, in a sense, a lens and a set of guides for their behavior in the classroom. Our coaching model really involves teachers capturing themselves in a cheap flip cam video, shipping an activity that they have recorded to a consultant or coach that edits that clip in a particular way or edits that video into 3 video clips with annotated feedback on those clips, posts those clips and the feedback on the website that a teacher can go to and see herself in the coach's feedback, and then the teacher and their coach meet on the web or on the phone to discuss, and that cycle loops over the course of about a 2-week period, and then repeats itself over the course of a calendar year. We've tested these in a couple different studies. Initially, we had 240 pre-K teachers all across the state of Virginia, split into groups where they got just a set of curricular materials, another group that got our video library website access, and another group that got the video library and the coaching model. And what we saw was that this is a graph that tracks ratings of teachers' sensitivity over the course of the year from September to June. You see the group that got the blue bar got the coaching model, and the green bar got just materials. And you see the significant gains in the quality of interactions that teachers display over the course of the year when they're coached. What's really important in this next graph shows that same finding, but for teachers who are teaching in classrooms where 100% of the kids are poor. And you'll notice here that the dotted line, in this case the control group, that's a significant downward slope, that over the course of the year the teachers' behavior with the kids got poorer in terms of its quality, while the teachers who were coached improved, and that gap at the end is significantly different, on the order of about 1 point. Overall, in that study, we found that these teachers grew more sensitive. They increased their children's engagement in instruction and improved their language. The high-poverty classrooms, as I just mentioned, benefited a great deal. And teachers, interestingly, who were just early career teachers, benefited both from coaching, but also just from being able to go see video clips on the website. So if you have very little teaching experience, it helps just to go and see other effective teachers display the effective behaviors with kids. Kids whose teachers received these supports made greater gains in tests of early literacy, showed lower levels of problem behavior, and higher levels of expressive language. And in fact, these professional development supports not only improved teachers, the quality of teachers' behavior, but closed the achievement gap by half for kids whose teachers were receiving those supports. And that's just 1 year of support. We then conducted another study, the National Center for Research in Early Childhood Education, where we built a course, a college course. This goes directly to many of the issues that Adele just raised in terms of the kind of training that people get in higher education. And likewise, we thought higher education is a great vehicle for scaling effective professional development. And if we could build a course that worked, then higher education might be a way to scale it. And then we also continued to evaluate our coaching model. Just a couple details on this, but there's a large number of teachers, very diverse group that were scattered across 10 early education sites all across the country. So cities like Chicago, Stockton, California, Charlotte, Hartford, Connecticut were all part of this study. So we really have a very diverse sample. It gives you an idea of being able to do something like this at a large level of scale. The course was really identified to try to help built to try to help teachers link interactions with kids learning, using the class as the lens for that link, teach teachers skills in being able to observe ineffective and effective interactions, and how interactions intersect with the delivery of language and literacy curriculum. And in this graph, you see that we assessed the impacts of the course on a number of different things, both right after the course and a year later. And you see that we changed teachers' beliefs and their knowledge about effective interactions. But importantly, we also changed their actual skill in being to see and label interactions with kids. So they were much better at looking at video and labeling what the teacher's doing that's effective, both after the course and a year later. But perhaps most important is the next graph, which shows that when we assessed teachers' interactions independently in the classroom, whether they got the course or not, the course changed and improved the qualities of teachers' emotional support in the classroom. And remember how important instructional support is. It improved their instructional support interactions considerably during a period right after taking the course. And that effect remained, although it was smaller, even a year later. So here's evidence of a college course that actually changes practice, and that those changes remain in some form a year after taking that course. We then looked at our coaching model, and in this particular case, in our first study, we coached all the teachers from our site at UVA, because all of this coaching occurs across the internet. In this next study, across these sites. We actually trained local coaches to implement the coaching, again, through the internet, and we kind of standardized the cycle a little bit more so that it could, again, be more manualized and scalable. When we evaluated the coaching impacts on teachers' practices again, we didn't see many effects on their emotional support, except for this, for the effect you'll see on the right-hand side, which is it improved their what we call regard for the child's perspectives. What this means is that teachers demonstrated greater understanding of children's perspectives in their interactions with children. So in a sense, they were essentially doing a better job of recognizing that kids had their own point of view about learning, and then responding to that point of view as they were interacting with them. It's a particularly important feature of interaction for young kids when you want to engage them in learning. We wanted the coaching to really focus on instructional support in our design because of those findings that I described earlier about both how low instructional support is and what looks like how important instructional support was for children's learning gains. And so here you see the impacts of this coaching model delivered to 500 teachers in 10 different sites across the country by local coaches. And you see tremendously solid impacts. These effect sizes are very high for this kind of research, where teachers who received coaching improved considerably in how they supported children's concept development, the quality of feedback that they were offering to kids, and the richness of their conversations and language with kids. Remember again that blue hump that was in that curve and that graph that I showed earlier, and how important it would be to move that. And we had identified in that threshold analysis the importance of moving teachers' instructional support even just a point from a 2 to a 3. And so here we're seeing an intervention that can move instructional support on that order of magnitude, at least a point. So we were also interested, given that we had delivered this intervention to 500 teachers, we assessed a lot of attributes of the process of delivering that intervention, of the implementation itself, and to see whether, questions such as, can 10 or 15 local coaches adhere to a standard protocol? Can 10 different instructors in different higher education institutions teach a course the same way? Can we train external instructors and coaches to deliver those interventions as needed? And is this quality of intervention or implementation strong at a fairly large level of scale? These are just some examples. So we did independent, the course instructors were required to videotape sessions, and here we rated whether they followed the directions for the implementation of the course session for 5 different sessions over the course of the course itself. And it was either a 0 if they didn't follow it, 1 if they partially followed it, or 2 if they did a very good job following it. So here you see evidence that all these different instructors, although there was a little more variation in the early session in terms of adherence, they did a very good job by the end of following the standardized protocol for giving that course session. We were also interested in how local coaches followed plans, and we saw over the course of 2 cohorts of training and supporting coaches that we were able to get in the second cohort a very high level of fidelity to the coaching model. It's not an easy coaching model. You're capturing and editing video. You're writing feedback to teachers in a very standardized way. And all of this is followed in a manual, and these coaches, again, coaching 500 teachers all across the country, all over the internet, did a very good job at this by the end of the spring of the second cohort. 1 means 100% agreement, really, with the model. So the implications we think of this work are that, first, first, we do indeed have effective professional development interventions in early childhood that change teachers' practice and children's learning, and that those can be delivered locally with a high degree of fidelity and quality by people in large numbers of locations scattered across the country. It is the case that the quality of implementation does matter, so that even though our course instructors and coaches did a good job, the ones who did better jobs of engaging teachers, those teachers learned more. And we also learned, many of you will be involved in writing regulation for training and support. This goes right to some of the issues that Adele talked about, that people who are implementing even models that have been proven effective need a lot of support. So our coaches and our course instructors called in every other week to a conference call where we did troubleshooting with them about how things were going and implementation. We did check-ins, and we believe very strongly that any model that's been proven effective has to be delivered at a large level of scale using highly standardized protocols. People really need to be trained up and supported to deliver the model in the way that it was tested to be effective. This is really important. We don't do this particularly well in most early childhood or most educational, quite frankly, interventions. So I think the implications of this work for improving the impact of classroom and early child care and settings impact on kids are considerable. First, I think this issue that standardized and valid observations can be scaled and potentially integrated into, in the K-12 world, what we call human capital management systems, or in basic professional development across early childhood or K-12. So we see a lot of this work in K-12 now. The press on teacher performance assessment. Early childhood has been doing this for a long time, and we can do this very, very well. There are a number of new policy frameworks that Adele mentioned, particularly quality rating and improvement systems driven by Race to the Top and the Early Learning Challenge. These offer a lot of potential, and observations such as the class or the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale are often part of those quality rating improvement systems. But we also find that those quality rating improvement systems have a whole lot of other components to them that often make them very complex, and oftentimes those other components are not weighted, are weighted equally to the weight given to an observation of teacher-student and teacher-child interactions when all the components are rolled up into whether a program has 3 stars or 4 stars or 5 stars. We need to be very careful about how those weights are determined and whether or not those 2, 3, 4, or 5-star programs are really different from one another in terms of how they help foster children's learning. We think it's incredibly important that when we do implement performance measures and professional development, whether that's in practice or policy, larger policy frameworks, that a central focus needs to be on teachers' interactions with kids. That's what kids experience, particularly younger kids, that those interactions are the medium that are going to drive their learning and development. And when we focus performance measures and professional development on those interactions, we actually begin to simplify the world for early childhood educators and find that can be a common language and lens and an aligned system for thinking about practice. Adele talked a lot about the importance of coherence in a professional development system. And we think that making, in a sense, the focus more centrally on interactions can help bring some coherence to the system and what we talk about across various sectors of the system. We've also shown these latter slides that I showed around our professional development model. Again, not just our model, but there's very good evidence that when you take a very focused and aligned form of professional development like coaching that's tightly focused around a very targeted set of practices or implementation of a particular curriculum, that professional development does a terrific job of improving interactions and student outcomes, not just in our experimental studies, but in others. One of the things that's, I think, a great shortcoming of an awful lot of professional development that's out there is that it's oftentimes very generic and not tied to a teacher's practices with specific groups of kids in a specific classroom. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of effects of benefits of coaching and those kind of models because they're precisely focused on what the teacher's practice is involved with day to day. At the state and federal policy, I think there's lots of ways that we can begin to think about incentives, career ladders, paths that begin to build supports and targets for teachers' behavior and performance in classrooms. So how we begin to use, whether it's a quality rating and improvement system, whether it's a career pathway, whether it's credits and degrees as structures and incentives for building the capacity of the early childhood workforce. I think embedding in all of those incentives a link to teachers' actual interactions with kids in the classroom is going to be important. And at the end of the day, I think we're showing, and not just us, but several other investigators are showing that indeed we can improve the kinds of impacts that teachers have on kids. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you to Bob. Just wanted to remind the fellows that Bob is an ELF faculty member, so you do have access to him through the NCSL Fellows Program. So if you have any follow-up with him, feel free to email me or Allison, and we will certainly get you in contact with Bob. Just want to thank both of the speakers for their presentations, and we're going to open it up now to questions and comments. So I'm going to ask the operator to come back on the line to remind our fellows how to ask a question, either through the phone or on the computer.
Okay, the floor is now open for questions. If you do have a question, please press *1 on your telephone keypad at this time. Your name will be announced, and your line made live when your question is chosen. If at any time your question has been answered, you can remove yourself from the queue by pressing 1. If you're using a speakerphone, we ask that while posing your question, you pick up your handset to provide favorable sound quality. If you would like to submit a question via the web, please type it in the chat box that you see on your screen and hit send. Please hold while we poll for questions.
And I guess while we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question of Adele. Here's a question that we have. We have a lot of different people and entities providing professional development. How do we know what they are providing, or how do we know when they're providing good professional development? Can you give us some insight, Adele?
Yeah, I think that's a big question that's going on in the field because we have scarce resources and we want them used well. There are a variety of ways to do this. At the higher ed level, one of the things that we've really been pushing is to make sure that people are getting a specialized degree in early childhood education that meets the standards for what a teacher of a child birth through age 8 should know and be able to do. That is different than a teacher with a child in 6th grade or in middle school or high school. And so making sure that we have those degrees. In fact, we don't have a lot of institutions yet at the bachelor degree level, and with the state cuts, we've actually lost many, many specialized early childhood teacher preparation programs at the associate degree level, which has been our gateway in this profession to higher ed and then to articulate to a BA. So I would look carefully at what's going on in your institutions of higher ed, both at the 2-year and 4-year level, and where are those degree programs that really specialize separately on early childhood. In terms of the community-based provided professional development, we've seen the growth of registries in your states, not all, but some, and there's the National Registry Alliance, which is part of a contract with us on a professional development center. And these registries not only show providers and professionals what are the trainings that have been approved, but what are the trainers that have been approved to provide the trainings, so that we're starting to get some assurance that there's some oversight for what is being provided, the quality of the professional development itself. So there are a couple different mechanisms, both through the higher ed lens and then the community-based lens, that are developing. But as I start out with, some of it is actually moving backwards. We're having less access now than we had just 2 years ago to specialized degrees.
Thanks, Adele. I wanted to remind the fellows that got on the call a little late that both presentations from both of the presenters will be available on the fellows' website, so be sure to access it if you need copies of the slides. So I'm going to ask the operator if we have any questions.
As of right now, there are no questions in the queue.
No questions in the queue. All right. Here's another question that I have. Let's see, for Adele. What about teacher licensure? Should we require all early childhood teachers to have a teaching license like K through 12? And if you want to chime in too, Bob, feel free.
I'll start. I think that is a goal, to be able to have a distinct license for early childhood. Pennsylvania has this distinct license. Some states have a license or endorsement for early childhood, but it often is only birth to 5, or even if it's preschool through 3rd grade, there'll be an overlapping license of K-6. And, of course, institutions tend toward that route, and principals associations and school board associations like that, they like the flexibility. But it doesn't go back and reflect the specialized knowledge and the training that you would get that Bob's talking about and what we're learning through accredited programs, teachers who have better content knowledge and child development knowledge and can scaffold instruction, use assessment of children to improve instruction. So a teacher license is helpful because that is specialized to early childhood without an overlap for the K-3 years, because it really does drive professional development and degree programs differently. That said, we're not ready on a field where many of your states don't even require initial training to work in a child care center as a lead teacher and only require GED to then overlay immediately a requirement of a teacher license. But it is an infrastructure that we should be building and then think about how to move people toward meeting it. We will need to compensate people better who do reach a higher level credential, but that's a conversation for another webinar on financing the system.
Yeah, I would agree with Adele that I think we need to be working toward a system of licensure for early educators, and that it just isn't sufficient to have it as an add-on or as part of a larger, preschool to 6th grade spanning license, even though it's more convenient for employers. I think that certainly wouldn't, that broad span doesn't reflect the specialized knowledge and skills. And I think the one issue is going to be planning this in a way so that the results of moving toward licensure actually produce the kind of results that we'd like to see for the workforce in terms of compensation, for the workforce in terms of their capacities and skills in classrooms, and for the kids that they serve. So we shouldn't make this move if ultimately it's not going to improve student learning. So we have to be very careful about not simply pushing people into the higher education system to take more courses that may not be contributing at the end of the day to their competence or to students' learning.
Thank you. So I see that we have a question on the computer. This is a question for Bob. What do you mean by focused performance measures on interactions with children? Can you give an example, please?
Sure. What I mean is that when we think about assessing a teacher's performance, okay, there's a lot of different ways to think about that. We could assess, in the K-12 world, we're assessing a lot of teachers' performance on the basis of value-added measures that only rely on growth in student test scores on the state standards test. My point in that particular bullet was to say, but absolutely in early childhood, that it's critical if we're going to build assessments for teachers' performance that observational measures of teachers' performance in the classroom, such as their interactions with children, have got to be part of that. So I think that's the evidence is very, very strong for that. So the classroom assessment scoring system that I pointed out as a observational tool for assessing teachers' performance is one of those kind of measures. But there are a number of other ones that also exist. The Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale would be another one where classrooms are routinely observed. Scores are assigned for the quality of that classroom and the quality of the teacher's performance in that classroom, and that the assignment of those scores should in part be based upon what teachers are actually doing with kids.
Thanks, Bob. We have another question here for Bob. Can you talk about the literacy focus finding for coaching effects?
Right. So that the literacy focus scale, which is actually not part of the class more formally, it actually assesses how explicit and didactic the instruction is in literacy. And we find that that actually goes down slightly when teachers are coached. There is some evidence to suggest that that those skills that are those behaviors that are assessed in literacy focus are the kind of behaviors that tend to travel along when teachers are implementing a highly focused and scripted and prescribed curriculum, which can often be a very important addition to their toolbox if they're implemented well. So what we like to see in some sense is a combination between that kind of behavior, if it's going to be present, systematic, explicit, and a teacher delivering that kind of lesson in a very sensitive and child-centered manner. That's a tough act for most teachers to do. And so I think the findings we're seeing on our coaching model that were displayed in that graph are showing that it's tough for teachers to put together both a highly focused literacy lesson and the kinds of other behaviors that are focusing on good feedback, rich language with kids, and sensitive engagement with kids that would be the hallmarks of more positive interactions with kids. So it's just showing, in some sense, how tough it is for teachers to do what we tend to think of as very strong and high quality early childhood teaching, which is what we're measuring with the class and what we see in the other evidence that I showed in terms of the relationship between the class and test scores, kids' readiness scores, and to also deliver some of the kind of systematic, explicit, highly didactic literacy curriculum that they're being asked to deliver now. That's a long answer, and it is a complicated finding. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Thanks, Bob. Rachel, do we have any questions on the phone?
Yes, we do. Our next question comes from Ms. Beth Bai, Senator for Connecticut. Ma'am, please state your question.
My question is, good afternoon, and thank you. It's been really helpful. To Professor Pianta on the teacher evaluation or on your classroom evaluation tool. We've just had a big fight in Connecticut about teacher evaluation, and as I listen to you, it seems like this tool could be a very fair way to do teacher evaluations. Are any districts or states using it as part of their teacher evaluation system?
Yeah, so I don't know if you're talking just from the early childhood or the whole K-12 system. I think you're probably referring to K-12.
But, even in the K-3 to 3, I guess.
Right. We are working with the state of Kansas right now, enrolling this out in the state of Kansas,
okay.
and in a couple of other school districts around the country. Right. Just to your point about fairness, I think this is a critical issue. So, particularly as state legislatures are beginning to move toward teacher evaluation and performance assessment and using observations, it's critical that that there's a real high level of focus on standardization, on rigorous quality control, training of observers, because at the end of the day, those numbers are going to have to stand up to some level of scrutiny and lack bias. And we work very hard at ensuring that that's the case.
Yeah, and I've used it and I've been trained on it, and it's just a great tool. And I think your comment before about the didactic teaching that's going on, this tool really addresses all pieces of it. So I think it could be part of our arsenal to make sure teaching is appropriate for young children as well. So thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on the phone?
As of right now, there are no more questions in the queue.
Okay. I have a comment here from Representative John Merrill thanking the presenters for their preparation involved in making your presentations today, so very thorough. So I just wanted to give that out to the presenters. Let's see if there are any other questions online. Okay. Well, I have a question here that I was curious about. Just in terms of how much is the coaching model? Is it a costly model compared to other professional development models out there?
So coaching costs more than a lot of other professional development, but I think one of the things to remember is that there's an awful lot of coaching that's going on right now in professional development. In fact, a lot of the kind of professional development that Adele was referring to is coaching, and most of the coaching that goes on, it does require the time of a coach and sometimes the time of a teacher as they're being coached. And our argument is, we're able to do this coaching for roughly $2,000 a teacher. So it's more expensive than a lot of other kind of professional development for sure, but it's also effective. And we've been able to show that teachers who are coached 1 year retain the benefits of that coaching into the second year, so that it's not like it goes away once they learn how to behave and interact more effectively with kids. So you have the added benefits downstream. And again, when you look at it relative to the existing money that's going toward coaching, our argument is that schools ought to be and programs ought to be deploying their coaching or professional development resources that they are already spending toward things that we know are more effective. So it's not adding more dollars; it should be redeploying existing dollars.
Redeploying, yeah. Thank you, Bob. Thanks for clarifying that. I have a question here of, do you know of any recent steps in the field to improve professional development standards for 0 to 3 providers?
We do know of states that are doing infant toddler competencies, and I could look that up and get that back to you specifically. There's been a lot of emphasis, obviously, on pre-K and what teachers know in pre-K, and as we are seeing in states more development of early learning guidelines, it's drawing them to really think more about looking at specified competencies for infant toddler teachers as well. But I could get you the actual states. There is starting to be more push toward the baby toddler years.
Bob, did you want to make any comments?
No, I think that Adele nailed it.
Yeah. Any other questions in the queue on the phone?
No, ma'am, there are no questions in the queue.
And I see no other questions here. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to finish up here early, which I bet
Julie,
all will be pleased. But I just wanted to mention. So again, thank you so much to presenters for their information today. Their information, presentations, handouts will be available on the Fellows website for you to access. If you need any follow-up, any other questions that you're thinking about as you're at your desk later on, feel free to shoot them to us, and we will certainly get them to the presenters to follow up. So let's see here. I just want to remind the fellows that there's a newsletter that you're all familiar with the latest research and policy information. Our next newsletter will be coming out shortly. If you want us to get any information about what you're doing in your state, please email that to me or to Allison, and we'll make sure that gets into the next newsletter. Let's see what else. Evaluation survey for today's call will be sent out shortly to the fellows. Please fill it out. Let us know what's working for you in terms of the information that we're getting to you, and we'll make sure that we listen to your advice and get what you need. Also, the Early Learning Fellows listserv, it's available to you to post questions, comments about what you're doing in your state. Feel free to put something out there on ELF listserv at ncsl.org. And the last thing on my list is that, again, the August 10th webinar, we're still looking for topics. If you have anything that you want to talk about, again, email Allison or I, and we will certainly make sure that we try to make sure that last webinar fits your needs. So I'm just going to check one last time if there are any other questions. Rachel?
There are no questions in the queue.
Let's see. Yep, and I don't see any other questions here, so we're going to wrap this up then and thank everyone. This call will be on the NCSL Fellows website. Check it out. Last push here, feel free to give us a call and contact us if you need anything from us. So thanks again to the fellows who are on the call today, on the phone and through your computer, and we hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.